Hey everyone, it's 4T here, and today I'm going to tell you the complete history of teaming in Brawl Stars from its very first appearance in the game to the present day. By the end, we will understand why Supercell ultimately lost the war against teamers. It all naturally started in 2017, because that's when Brawl Stars actually first appeared. Initially, there was no teaming in Brawl Stars, just like in all other Battle Royale games. So why did it appear in Brawl Stars? It's actually quite simple. The only reason is that Supercell didn't start banning players for teaming. In Fortnite, in Apex, as far as I know, accounts get banned for this immediately. But Supercell has slightly different rules. The developers believe that in Showdown, the main goal is to survive at any cost. Whether that cost is teaming or not isn't as important, so they didn't ban players. And the very first characters that players started teaming with were, oddly enough, Dynamic and Barley. Why did this happen? It's actually very simple. Both Barley and Dynamic are throwers. They are very different in their mechanics from other characters, such as Bull, Shelly, Colt, and Spike. At that time, there weren't many characters yet, but there were already enough for Barley and Dynamite to stand out significantly. It was almost impossible to play as them up close because Bull, Spike, and Colt would easily take out these two characters on open maps with no walls. So they decided to team up and not kill each other by spinning on the map. This was the starting point for teaming up. Initially, only the throwers were teaming up. It wasn't the case that all characters on the map were teaming up. During those times, the war between Mortis and the throwers began because Mortis was the only one who had a chance to counter these crowds of teamers in Showdown. So players either chose Mortis or the throwers. Moving on to 2018, even those who didn't play Brawl Stars learned about teaming from various memes and so on. However, not all players were teaming up yet. And yes, strangely enough, in matches, it was about half and half it and without teamers. Naturally, the higher the trophies, the more teamers there were. Also, Rats players who betrayed their teammates started to appear more actively. Earlier, it might sound strange, but there were far fewer Rats than there are now. It was considered very shameful, and Rats were encountered much less frequently than they are today. And also, during that time, Supercell started to become not particularly fond of what was happening with teaming in their game. They began trying to eradicate teaming. Initially, they introduced modifiers, meteors, mushrooms, energy drinks, and the bot. These modifiers are still in the game today, but why were they introduced specifically to eradicate teaming? The meteors were supposed to strike where the teaming crowd was located. Moving on to 2021, which incredibly changed showdowns. Until this year, long-range brawlers were mainly popular in Showdown because tanks literally couldn't do anything to them. The same Piper, Colt, and other ranged brawlers were dominating, while tanks like Primo, Bull, and so on couldn't do anything to them. Therefore, Supercell decided to buff tanks and made it so that their super could now be charged. And as you can understand, Primo becomes incredibly overpowered after this buff because his super, unlike Frank's, Jackie's, or Bull's, easily counters long-range brawlers and throwers. So all El Primo had to do was literally take damage and then dive into the teaming crowd. But in the end, they worked absolutely poorly and did not help eradicate teaming. The same goes for the mushrooms. They were supposed to appear only under the player who was far away from the other teamers. But again, it didn't work as intended. Even if it did work, it didn't really help much. The energy drink also wasn't a very good idea, and it didn't help eradicate teaming. Therefore, the only modifier that managed to almost completely eradicate teaming was the bot. But it was removed from the game because if Showdown always had the bot mode, it would be difficult for regular players and especially for beginners because the developers have one simple rule. Showdown should be a standard battle royale like in other games without any super complications. Therefore, I think everyone would agree that if Showdown always had the bot mode, it would be a bit strange and not as fun to play. So now this modifier only appears on Halloween, well, or you can play with it in friendly games or on daily maps from the community. Moving on to 2019, Supercell seemed to have given up and completely stopped influencing teaming in any way. All their modifiers failed completely. Perhaps they were very disappointed and just stopped making any attempts to eradicate teamers. And instead, they introduced two wonderful passive abilities around the same time. This was second win for B and extra life for BB. They were very similar, but still had some differences. With BB, her passive ability spawned with full HP, charged swings, and a shield upon death. Whereas B simply didn't die, she remained with 1 HP and an invulnerable shield for a certain period. As you understand, these passive abilities are no longer in the game because they were fixed, I think 3, 4, or possibly even 5 times, but it didn't help at all. Both BB and BA were mega overpowered in Showdown. Everyone played as them. and everyone was teaming up with them, while at the same time, incredible records started appearing, reaching 20,000 trophies, which were previously physically impossible. For example, in 3v3 modes, reaching such a high number of trophies was unrealistic. But in Showdown, playing as BB and B, it was possible, and people did it, which greatly annoyed other players because if you didn't play as BB or B, you literally had zero chances to gain trophies. Therefore, as I mentioned, Supercell nerfed these passive abilities several times, and then they completely removed them from the game forever. Moving on to 2020. Once again, Supercell didn't eradicate teaming, they didn't introduce new modifiers, new modes, or make any changes to Showdown, nor did they start banning teamers, although literally everyone expected it. Therefore, absolutely all players who were against teaming before also started teaming up or switched to 3v3 modes, because now gaining trophies in any other way was simply impossible. Because if you don't team up, you'll just get crushed by the rest of the map's teamers. That's why in 2020, there was such a radical division of people into two camps: those who play 3v3 and stay in 3v3, and those who play solo showdown and stay in solo showdown. And moving on to 2021, which incredibly changed showdowns. Until this year, long-range brawlers were mainly popular in Showdown because tanks literally couldn't do anything to them. The same Piper, Colt, and other ranged brawlers were dominating, while tanks like Primo, Bull, and so on couldn't do anything to them. Therefore, Supercell decided to buff tanks and made it so that their super could now be charged. And as you can understand, Primo becomes incredibly overpowered after this buff because his super, unlike Frank's, Jackie's, or Bull's, easily counters long-range brawlers and throwers. So all El Primo had to do was literally take damage and then dive into the teaming crowd. Moving on to 2022, perhaps the least interesting year in terms of teaming development. Supercell, no matter how hard they tried, couldn't eradicate teaming. They didn't want to ban players for teaming, and no tank nerfs helped either. They nerfed El Primo and other tanks, but still in matches it was 10 out of 10 teamers. And mostly, as I said, it was El Primo Buzz or Shelly. And finally, 2023 began with an incredible meta shift because the developers changed and buffed it significantly, making it one of the toughest metas in Showdown. Thank goodness they've already fixed it at the moment. So the last hope for eliminating teaming rests with the anti-teaming community. Strange as it may sound, it's true the only way to eradicate teaming is when players refuse it on principle grounds. In my opinion, this is the only real option at the moment. But what do you think will happen next with teaming? Perhaps I missed some important points. I'll be glad to hear your opinion in the comments. I always like the most useful and interesting comments. That's all from me for today. This was 4T. Good luck to everyone. Goodbye.